So this is from the Jerusalem Post. Here's the headline: Biden blasts BDS, why it matters. Biden's firm rejection of BDS contrasts with the views of several members of Congress, led by Representatives Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, both of whom have explicitly endorsed BDS. Okay, so Biden criticized BDS, although I think he did walk back some of this criticism as well. Maybe not. Amidst the pandemic and the protests following the murder of George Floyd, a series of important Israel-related policy statements by presidential candidate Joe Biden and his top aides have gone largely unnoticed. Not by me, right? I use Israel-Palestine as a fucking barometer of what to expect from an administration because Israel-Palestine, here's something so radioactive that you don't have much benefit in America of taking like what the rest of the world would call a pro-Palestine position. Okay? Yeah, I mean, like to the extent that Bernie Sanders would say things, only taking only small donations and also saying things that align much more so with my perspective on Israel-Palestine. The fact that, the squad has, sometimes rightly, I think, gotten into hot water about like some statements or like whatever. But generally speaking, like clearly those things did not help them, right? Like media coverage of like the squad, parsing their words, like did they say something anti-Semitic or not? Like, what do they mean by this phrase? Or do they know about the history, the context of this or that? That wasn't good for them. It just wasn't. That's just literally true. Like just in general, like baseline of whatever the media says, like if it says that someone is like anti-Semitic, like more often than not, like that view will kind of trickle down, right? So, I am interested in this question, right? And I'm interested in what the Jerusalem Post has to say about this. So June 17th, Biden's top foreign policy advisor, Tony Blinken, declared that Biden, quote, would not tie military assistance to Israel to things like annexation or other decisions by the Israeli government with which we might disagree, end quote. This would be an important statement on any given day, but it takes an added weight in the midst of the vigorous debate about Israel's possible extension of sovereignty to parts of the West Bank. Wow, this must be a completely fucking like right-wing. Just like the phrasing. Okay, so first of all, before we even get to like Blinken's statement, like just think about, oh my goodness. Okay, so I think it's since we won't see that anymore. Okay, we won't see that anymore. That's up there, and because we're not doing inspect element deleting, it's not going to pop in again. So I think we're good. But just look at this phrasing. This is kind of sick. This would be an important statement on any given day. Important. Well, important is typically, it's a positive adjective, right? It's not a neutral adjective. It's not just like, it's not something of substance, right? Just this is not like a bloodless adjective, right? This would be an important statement, right? So they are, already judging it here. But it takes on added weight in the midst of the vigorous debate about Israel's possible extension of sovereignty to parts of the West Bank. In the midst of the vigorous debate, who's debating this? Who's fucking debating? Who's debating whether or not it's a good idea for Israel to illegally annex territory under military occupation? What do you mean by a vigorous debate? It's fucking illegal. It's illegal. It's illegal by a factor of, what is the latest vote? 163-5. This was a few days ago. The UN voted for Palestinian statehood. Okay? They do this every fucking year. It's hardly passed in the news every single year. But I like to check like every year in the news for. I wonder what the ratio now is for the UN coming together to vote on giving Palestinians a state. The state that was promised to them before 1948. The state that is still like actually promised to them now, but the state that's been promised to them more or less as long as a state that has been promised to Israel. Right? So a few days ago, the UN voted 163 to 5 in favor of Palestinian statehood. Okay, which means, of course, when we say Palestinian statehood, this can only mean one thing. We're talking about pre-1967 war borders, right? It's pre-1967, right? So that means something very specific. That means you cannot have any settlements in the West Bank, much less annexations of this. So, I mean, 163 to 5. The nations that voted against statehood, it's like fucking Micronesia. It's like some other like, small like islands that are in this kind of like, America has this like fucking parasitic relationship with them. Okay. Like, where they can't say anything. They can't dissent in any fucking way. Okay. They need to at least show this kind of like symbolic support. Okay. They have to fucking do it. And of course it's symbolic because the only vote that matters is America's, whether or not it vetoes this, which it does every single year. So anyway, there is no vigorous debate. Okay. The vigorous debate has been had, and this is the way that it's been coming out for years and years and years. 163 to 5. Okay? 163 nations vote in favor of Palestinian fucking statehood. And then America, as always, vetoes it. And then there is no Palestinian statehood. This is the crazy part. Like all the people that now do the 1960s thing of like, you have to be patient, guys. Now do the same thing with Israel-Palestine when it comes to like Democratic Party being like essentially completely indistinguishable from Republicans on this. Now, right now, we're adding this like additional layer of like, we're gonna call it a vigorous debate, right? I mean, again, that debate has been had, okay, and it didn't break the way that these guys wanted it to break. But just listen to this again, though. But takes on an added weight in the midst of the vigorous debate about Israel's possible extension of sovereignty into parts of the West Bank. This is their fucking way of saying of Israel's illegal capture of land by war tactic, right? Like, I'm not sure if any defenders of this kind of policy are watching this, but if you are, maybe you don't know this, but the way that Israel actually came to be was people were so dismayed by Hitler and by World War II and by Japan and by Mussolini that they came together and said, in this new world order that we're going to construct, we're actually going to make it illegal for land to be captured by war because guess what? Hitler fucking did it. And Hitler waged a war and Hitler was killed. And the people that were loyal to Hitler were executed. And we're still hunting them to this day. Okay? And under this context of the post-war order, we said, listen, Jews were, destroyed in any country that they've been in. The solution clearly is, let's give them their own state. I think that's perfectly rational. Like, what fucking shit lib, especially a woke shit lib listening to this, would deny at least the cosmetic importance of having a persecuted minority being given self-determination, right? But the way that land that was promised to Jews and also to Palestinians at the same time, the way that now it's being talked about is It's not land that was captured by war, although it was. It's not land that, if we were to take Israel's behavior here to its logical conclusion, we would essentially end up with a situation where the same kind of like post-Hitler world order that made Israel possible, like Israel is not abiding by those rules. Like, I fully support the existence of an Israeli state, even a Jewish majority Israeli state. Right? I could fully support that. But we can't talk about the other side there, right? Which is the Palestinians that lived there, continue to live there, are second-class citizens there, and are being, experiencing like just more land being stolen in like World War II-esque ways, right? This is exactly the thing that we came together to prevent from happening in the future. They're doing now, okay? This is a land grab by war. This is why I said pre-1967 war borders. This is their land. This is not Israel's possible extension of sovereignty. What a fucking bloodless way of saying an illegal land grab as a result of war. That's been condemned 163-5 every fucking year for like, at least a decade. Probably more. Right? And I mean, let's go to Tony Blinken's statement here. So, I mean, we got the context, right? We know what the newspaper is like, right? So Biden's top foreign policy advisor, Tony Blinken, declared that Biden, quote, would not tie military assistance to Israel to things like annexation or other decisions by the Israeli government with which we might disagree. I don't understand what this means, because I know that Blinken does not mean this literally, right? So since I know that Tony Blinken does not mean this literally, cannot fucking possibly mean this literally, even if he's like a complete traitor to liberal interventionism as currently constituted, I know that he can't literally believe that. Like, what does he mean by that? America would not tie military assistance to Israel to things like annexation or other decisions by the Israeli government with which we might disagree. He can't literally mean that. What if like one of the fucking like revolving door of like circus freaks, Knesset, freakazoids, for lack of a better term, comes out yet again, right? This is why I'm saying revolving door, right? This is a carousel. Not only one person, the Knesset, has said this. There have been other people that said that Palestinians should be bombed, should be nuked. Because although Israel doesn't, say it, Israel does have nuclear capabilities, most likely. If, like, Netanyahu comes out and says, you know what, like, the West Bank needs to be nuked and we're going to actually nuke the Palestinians and all of Gaza, and actually, like, follows through with it. Let's take the most extreme fucking case scenario. Clearly, Tony Blinken would tie military assistance to that kind of behavior by Israel. Or, you know what, maybe I'm being a shitlib and I really, I'm delusional to thinking that. But I do believe that there is a certain line that Tony Blinken would consider to be a red line that Israel cannot engage in, right? Before America starts to consider cutting off military assistance to Israel. I'm sure that red line exists somewhere. And perhaps it's not as far as the one that I just illustrated with Netanyahu carrying out a nuclear attack on a West Bank and Gaza. I'm sure, and hopefully I am correct, that that red line for Tony Blinken is much, much, further in the realm of possibility. But if that line right? If people are like, goodness, Alex, like, you're being so unfair. Don't you think like Tony Blinken would, he does have a stand, right? He does have a red line. And clearly, Alex, like, it's absurd for you to think that he would brook a nuclear war against Palestinians and still give arms to Israel, which would be a complete pariah state. And I get that criticism, which is why I explicitly said I'm sure that red line is a lot closer to something within the realm of possibility. And that's exactly what my problem is. Like, Tony Blinken does have a line that is closer to the realm of possibility than nuclear war against Palestinians. Okay? But my problem is that red line seems to be further than Israel's, to put it in the words of the Jerusalem Post, possible extension of sovereignty to parts of the West Bank. The fact that that is not a red line. Like, this is why risk mitigation in the kind of liberally hegemonic model is so delusional. Okay? Just think about what transpired here. Okay? Think about what you've been hoodwinked into accepting. Okay? Simply because Trump might have been okay with Netanyahu engaging in nuclear war against Palestinians and Tony Blinken would not, we're supposed to stomach a war crime by Israel that is not only formally annexed, but also, like, I don't know, in some level, like, maybe it's not recognized by the United States, but like, what the fuck does that even mean? If you're acting as if like that's the case, if you're saying that, you're gonna not label West Bank goods as, occupied territory goods, right? And that's like, this is not like a fucking someone's like opinion. Like, this is like literally a technical definitional term. That's an occupied territory under international law, guys. Like, this is not some fucking like anti-Zionist talking about a conspiracy theory. This is just by law. Like, if we want to be objective, like if we don't want to talk about our own like ideological biases and preferences and differences, we do have to sort of defer to some kind of baseline law, and this is the law. Like what is the difference, right? I mean, you're saying you're okay with annexation. You were okay with Israel's campaign against Gaza in 2014 because that wasn't tied to your like when you were like bombing Gaza and killing, what was it, like 4,000 or 5,000? I forget how many Gazans were killed. But like as they were being fucking bombed with white phosphorus, clearly the military assistance then wasn't tied to that. Okay, so maybe nuclear war is a bridge too far. Okay, fine. Tony Blinken is not that guy. He's not the type of guy. He's not the type of liberal internationalist that supports nuclear war. Tony Blinken is not the kind of liberal internationalist that supports nuclear war, guys. You fucking hit the gold mine, right? You fucking hit a jackpot voting for Biden. But he's okay with like pre-World War II era violations of international law. He's okay with like pre-Hitler violations of international law. It's just crazy, right? In addition, Blinken's comments, as well as two recent Israel-related statements by Biden himself, are particularly significant because they reject views recently espoused by some major figures in the Democratic Party. Yeah, major figures are like numerically just fucking squashed. In a policy paper posted on his campaign website in May, Biden, referring to the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions BDS campaign, vowed that his administration will, quote, firmly reject the BDS movement, which singles out Israel and too often veers into anti-Semitism and fights other efforts to delegitimize Israel on the global stage, end quote. Biden also said that if elected president, he will, quote, sustain our unbreakable commitment to Israel's security, end quote, including, quote, the guarantee that Israel will always maintain its qualitative military edge. And the crazy part is, despite everything that I said above, I mean, I'm not actually so, I'm not so like, I'm not so against critiquing BDS. I think BDS is mostly bullshit. I don't think the act of boycotting Israel or divesting from Israel, I don't think the act of saying I'm not going to buy wine made by settlements in the West Bank, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And those are good things. I mean, like, just in a kind of very like generic way. If there's like a country that's doing something that you don't agree with politically, whether it's like, I don't know, apartheid in South Africa or apartheid in Israel, you could just say like, hey, like, the apartheid part of it, like for example, the illegally occupied territories, like I'm not gonna buy goods from there. I'm gonna like, fine, I'll buy maybe goods from Israel, but maybe I won't buy goods from there. I'm not against this kind of action. Obviously, like you as a consumer, like if the fucking like corporatist parties have essentially just turned you into these like nonstop consumers, and you're just there to like be this kind of like this fucking churning wheel for capital, and you keep like generating capital, and you keep like being the like this the just generically like a mass consumer. If you are, the market that the goods can be dumped upon, and you will actually have a desire to buy them, like, you're given at least like some power, right? So if you have like some consumptive power, I think it's logical for you to say, if there's a country that's doing something I don't like, you know what, I'm just not going to buy its goods. If I have any assets in there, I'm going to divest my assets from this country. I know that it's controversial to say Israel, but guess what? In during fucking apartheid South Africa, it was controversial to say that too. I mean, I'm not sure how many people remember this, but Nelson Mandela was actually like in prison, and he was going to be actually executed as a terrorist. So that was actually the context. So it's not necessarily that different than what Palestinians are experiencing. And if you think that apartheid boycotts made sense in the 80s, you could make a good case for similar kinds of boycotts going into the present day. But that said, BDS has been ineffective. The BDS strategy of, I mean, I don't know how else to say it. And, I got into an argument explicitly about this with a friend of mine, where, I was making the claim, right? But the guys, like, look, don't fucking make my job harder than it has to be. Okay. Don't make my job harder. I shouldn't have to argue on this kind of turf, right? Because I have to spend so much time with like people that I know dealing with like their like personal fucking disinformation, okay? Related to Israel-Palestine. And you're making it hard when you pretend like this is not an issue. Okay, so when we had Barack, right? Barack and Clinton and Arafat. We had Taba. We had Camp David. When they were meeting, the narrative that ultimately came out of that meeting and that sort of like caught the public imagination, given the way that the media, breaks in America, was after Taba. Oh my! Is this serious? What is this thing? Anyway, after Taba, what was his name? The guy that wrote a something piece, a fragile piece, a something piece. Anyway, he was one of the diplomats on the American side. We had Brzezinski on the other side that contradicted what this guy said. I forget his name. Sorry, guys. And anyway, the narrative that came out was his narrative, and this narrative was Arafat and other leaders demanded a right of return. Right, so the right of return for Palestinians is Palestinians that are legitimately refugees or the children of refugees. They have a right to, according to the UN. So this is, again, international law. You could disagree with it. I don't care, right? This is what the law states, right? This is the Palestinian do. The Palestinians are allowed two things under international law. A, they're allowed a state in the pre-1967 war borders, and they are allowed a, quote, just resolution to the refugee question. This does not mean that every refugee, right, has to necessarily be, allowed, back into Israel, right? Like every Palestinian everywhere does not automatically get the right to be part of Israel. Although technically, again, under international law, technically there is, technically that is their due. But for practical purposes, everything that you see coming out from the UN, from negotiations, from everything, the context is that is never going to be the thing that is asked for, right? So that has never been a legitimate, thorn, right? When people say that cliche shit about oh my God, such a complex, thing, it's such a complex conflict, and Palestinians don't negotiate in good faith, and Israelis don't negotiate in good faith. This bad faith accusation on the part of Palestinians, this has never been part of the equation. According to what I can only tell is in fact the consensus position, right, on Taba and Camp David. Arafat ultimately said that he would be okay, to average some of the numbers that I saw. I didn't see a number that was higher, credibly, than 250,000 Palestinians are allowed to move back and resettle in Israel as refugees and be legally termed refugees and have the sort of I guess reparations that would come with being refugees. Either under Israeli law or perhaps there was something that would kick in under international law. That number though, high end, I think it was around 250,000. I saw numbers as low as 10,000, and I saw numbers that averaged around 100,000. So my view is that Arafat offered as a just resolution of the refugee question, right? To literally this would have been the thing that under international law would have satisfied the legal due of Palestinians, okay? And that thing was we would resettle 100,000 Palestinians into Israel, okay? That was it. This would not cause a demographic collapse in Israel. It wouldn't. It would not cause a demographic collapse. Yes, it would make it a little more browner, a little more Palestinian, a little more, the power base might be a little bit different. You might have to run different kinds of campaigns. Maybe now the Knesset will be a little less competitive if it runs the typical kind of campaigns. If these Palestinians are actually also allowed to vote, let's say. How did I even get on this shit? Yeah, so if this was the norm, right, since the 90s, and all logical points that I can see, including Brzezinski, right, who, people might have their problems with him, really right and left, I get it, and he's definitely not a progressive icon or anything like that. I trust him above most spectators, and the fact that he's backed up by so many other diplomats that were there, it sort of says something to me that just resolution to the refugee question would have been no more than 100,000, and that clearly is a politically viable solution. The fact that Barack didn't take that deal, right? that reflects very badly on Israel, guys. So for people to start arguing immediately that we need to have like 4 million Palestinians, is there even 4 million Palestinians? I think that the total number is something like four. Like 4 million Palestinians move back to Israel like just right away. Like you're not actually like arguing anything that is like true international law, right? Like I think it's useful, if you want to literally be a liberal internationalist in the way that is truly like liberal internationalism in spirit as well as in letter, right? Um, you you're gonna have to essentially say that we're starting from the law, right? Everything else is bullshit, right? As a starting point, right? Now that you can't bring other things in, the law states we need a just resolution. Guess what? 100,000 was that number. Maybe it was 250,000. Still not a big enough demographic shift, but today the BDS movement, maybe not everybody in BDS, maybe not, a BDS itself all the time. Like, I don't know to what degree BDS is like even decentralized. Like, I haven't really kept tabs on them too much over the past few years. But people in BDS have been trying to just say, like, essentially, part of our movement is the right of return is going to be fully satisfied with every like with every Palestinian being resettled into Israel. And I have to be honest, like that is I always talk about like things like functional racism. Like, I get things technically might not be racist. Like, maybe Derek Chauvin was not technically himself a racist when he, put his knee on the neck of George Floyd. But functionally speaking, it is indistinguishable that, he was processed through some kind of like system and bottleneck that at the end of it, he was essentially engaging in a racist act, right? For all functional purposes. For all functional purposes, if you have such a huge demographic shift in Israel, like you no longer have Israel like as Israel is as presently constituted. Like definitely not the Israel that was promised to Jewish people in 1948, and also like in many respects not the Palestine that is has been promised to Palestinians since also before 1948. And that's kind of important. That strikes me as kind of important, right? Like, first of all, as BDS, like whatever that you fucking believe in personally, like I don't care, but you need to square with that initial set of promises, right? That's not nothing. There is some inertia there. There is some level of righteousness there. There's some level of credibility there. So please, you should start explaining this like pre-1948 world to me in a way that is like separate from my understanding, because like my understanding does not really allow what what you think you want here. So, what is this like demographic shift going to do? Like, and like that's such a needless conflation. That is such a, and like whether or not it's like anti-Semitic on the part of every person that is advocating this is also kind of irrelevant, right? Like again, I said functional racism. Yes, I think it's silly in the way that like very powerful people like within Israel and like these kinds of lobbies are always crying foul of like anti-Semitism, but honestly, like functionally speaking, like if you sort of like are able to like erase Israel off the map, functionally to me it is as racist of an act as that knee on George Floyd's neck, even if Derek Chauvin is not technically himself a racist or even has these racist feelings. Like it's not a relevant lens to view anything through, right? So this would be my critique of BDS, and I want to like tie this. There's I guess like not too much more to say on Tony Blinken, but I think Norman Finkelstein actually, when he first talked about this in, let me see if we got this. When he first talked about this all the way back in 2012, right, when BDS was like still like I mean, it's still a thing, right? But when BDS was really making waves, Finkelstein really explained the kind of BDS issue really well to me. It's kind of like like a lot of what I've said, like Finkelstein himself argued, and he says it pretty well, right? So I want people to kind of consider this like in any kind of discussion of BDS.
Another one of your book is called, actually no, I don't know the name of the book, but it's with Muin Rabani about solving the Israel-Palestine conflict. So how do we do it?
Basically, to put it in a nutshell, if you're serious about politics and you're serious about trying to build a mass movement, you can't go beyond what the public is ready to accept. The public is ready to accept, in my opinion, what international law says. So if you were to put forth a very simple slogan, when you're asked, how do you want to solve it? I say, easy. All I want to do is enforce the law. The law is clear, it's unambiguous, it's uncomplicated. There is a near unanimous consensus on what the law says. And that's what I want to do. But the law is clear. The settlements are illegal, that's correct. East Jerusalem is occupied Palestinian territory, that's correct. The West Bank and Gaza are occupied Palestinian territory, that's correct. But it's also correct that Israel is a state. That's also the law. If you want to use the law as a weapon or as leverage in order to reach public opinion, you can't be selective with the law. You can't say, I have the right to walk at the green, but I'm kind of agnostic on the red. No. If you have the right to walk at the green, it's because you have an obligation to stop at the red. But the law is a package deal. So if you want to use the law also says Israel is a state. And the problem with the solidarity movement is it's a kind of mirror image of the so-called Palestinian Authority. In my opinion, the Palestinian Authority, the so-called Palestinian Authority, I think its goals are correct. It always talks about international law and international legitimacy. Namely, what the law says, what the UN says, that's what they say they want. Their goals are correct. The problem is their means will never work because the Palestinians' main asset is the Palestinian people, the 4 million people of Palestine. And if you mobilize them and galvanize them, I don't think Israel has a prayer. Can't win. But the Palestinian Authority will never mobilize them because they're afraid if you mobilize them, the authority will meet the same fate as Mubarak and all the others because they're a gang of corrupt, wretched collaborators. So their goal is correct, but their means will never achieve their goal because all they want to do is bargain, behind closed doors with the Israelis. And the Israelis will never give them anything. Frederick Douglass, the American abolitionist, power never concedes anything without a demand. It never has, it never will. Unless you have the force to extract it from Israel, they will never give you anything. And the main force, the main weapon, is the people. And they'll never organize it. The solidarity movement, I think its means are correct to try to, I have no problem with the boycotts, divestment, sanctions, and all of that, nonviolent civil disobedience like the flotillas, the legal weapon like the attempt at universal jurisdiction. I think the means are right, but the goal will never fly. You want to say you're agnostic on Israel? You want to say you want one state? There's nothing in the international law for one state. You're not going to win a public to that. Once you step out of your little cult, your little ghetto, and you enter the real world, and you try to reach a broad public, and you say, we are a rights-based organization, which is what BDS likes to say, and we want to enforce our rights. Okay, the law. So, once you step out of your ghetto, you're no longer just talking to yourself. There is the other side. They also make themselves heard. So they say, no, that's not true. They're lying. They say they want to enforce the law, but they really want to destroy Israel. They want to eliminate Israel. So now the public hears both sides. And they come back to the solidarity movement, and they say, is that true? You want to destroy Israel? And then the solidarity movement says, oh, we don't have a position on Israel. We don't take a position. Oh, really? You don't take a position on Israel? Well, then we're not going to take a position on BDS. The law is clear. You want to use the International Court of Justice on your side? Okay, the International Court of Justice, it said, the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, they are occupied Palestinian territories. That's correct. But the ICJ also said that pre-June 67 border is Israel's legal border. That's their country. That's the law. You want to promote one state? Fine, that's your right. But then don't pretend you're trying to enforce the law. That's not true. You want to selectively enforce the law.
But I think the way I see it is that when you talked about the Palestinians, you said 4 million people. But what the BDS movement, and I think more and more that the Palestinian people in general wants to portray, that the Palestinian people are not 4 million. There's the refugees, there is the citizens, Palestinian citizens of Israel. So it comes to a much bigger number. And I think, just to conclude, that the fact that not taking a position on do we want the state of Israel to exist, I think it's not saying that we want to destroy Israel, it's that saying that the 20% Israeli Palestinian citizens of Israel have the right to have the same rights than Israelis. So,
Frank, I'm not talking for the video. I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
And I'm getting a little bit exasperated with what I think is a whole lot of nonsense, you know? And I have been at this 30 years. I have earned my right to speak my mind, and I'm not going to tolerate what I think is silliness, childishness, and a lot of leftist posturing. There is a settlement that's been proposed by the international community for resolving the conflict. Now, it does include a statement, a just resolution of the refugee question based on UN Resolution 194, the right of return and compensation. There is nothing anywhere in the international consensus for resolving the conflict that says anything about the minority inside Israel, the Palestinian Arab minority. It's not there. You want to drag in that minority and start talking about them? Well, in my opinion, you'll get nowhere, because the whole world is filled with countries that persecute their minorities. Would you like to be an untouchable in India? Do you know what it's like to be a Dalit in India? Do you want to go through every country in the Middle East and how they treat their minorities? And then it's just open season by the other side to show what hypocrites you are. Why are you focusing on that minority and not 10 million other minorities in the world? If you look at, for example, when Yasser Arafat declared a state in November 1988, and you read the platform, the political document, and so forth, there's no mention of the Palestinian Arabs. There is a mention of the refugee question, that's correct. There's no mention of the Palestinian Arabs in Israel. People want to just drag in the kitchen sink because it's not really about them. I mean, we have to be honest. And I loathe the disingenuousness. They don't want Israel. They think they're being very clever. They call it their three-tier. We want the end of the occupation, we want the right of return, and we want equal rights for Arabs in Israel. And they think they're very clever because they know the result of implementing all three is what? What's the result? You know and I know. What's the result?
I think we don't.
There's no Israel.
I think there's,
No.
No, but I think the result is like there's no Israel the way Israel is now.
There is no Israel, full stop. And the law is Israel is a state. It has its defined borders. And if you want to eliminate Israel, that's your right. But I don't think you're going to reach anybody. I think it's a non-starter. If you say you want to enforce the law, and in fact impose it on Israel, because they're not going to be accepted, then the law is clear. And you have to say, and you'll never hear the Solidarity Movement say, 2 states. Go look at the UN General Assembly resolution. It always begins, peaceful settlement of the Palestine question. The last part where they lay out the terms for resolving the conflict, they say a 2-state settlement, and then they say East Jerusalem, West Bank, Gaza, occupied Palestinian territories, settlements are illegal under international law, and a just resolution of the refugee question based on the right of return. But it's all within that framework. And if you don't want the framework, then stop talking about the law. And stop trying to be so clever. Because you're only clever in your cult. The moment you step out, you have to deal with Israeli propaganda. And here, they have a case. They say, no, they're not really talking about rights. They're talking about they want to destroy Israel. And in fact, I think they're right. I think that's true. I'm not going to lie. When I do politics, I have one standard. You know what my standard is? Can I defend this position in public? Not can I defend it in my little cult, but whether stepping outside my cult, whether I can defend it in public. And when I listen to Muin, because we spoke together in Boston, and Muin is writing the chapter in the book on the refugees, and I listened very carefully to him, because the division of labor was I'll do the settlements, he'll do the refugees, and we haven't had a chance. We've corresponded, but we haven't seen each other's positions yet. And I listened to him, and I didn't listen with the ear, is he right or is he wrong? Is what he's saying moral, is what he's saying immoral? What I was listening was, can I defend it or can't I defend it? If I can't defend it, then what am I doing? What's the point? Do we want to build a movement or do we want to create a cult? Now, Frank, you have to be honest. Honesty is important in politics. If you tell a public, Israel's population is 7.5 million. Of those 7.5 million, 5.5 million are Jewish. And the other 2 million are Palestinian, Arab, and neither of the above. And you say, as a lot of the Solidarity movement says, all 6 million Palestinian refugees have to go back. Okay? Now, will a public think it's reasonable for 6 million Palestinians to descend on a country which right now has 1.8 million Palestinians and 5.5 million Jews, which means you're going to completely overnight radically, completely change the demographic balance in the country. Will a person, the public, find that reasonable? My answer is, you can give them every fact behind the creation of the refugees, and they'll still see the Israeli position that that's not tenable. I don't think you can sell it.
But I do think, I mean, I totally get your point, but I do think you're portraying a darker picture of the solidarity movement as really where it is now. I don't really hear people saying, I think people are very educated on the refugee issue, and I've never heard people saying 6 million refugees.
I hear it all the time.
Okay, so
Not never, I'm saying reverse.
Yeah.
I hear it all the time. I just spoke last night in Glasgow, and that was the first statement. What about the 6 million Palestinian refugees who want to return? That was the very first question. I hear it all the time. I hear sometimes people say, until every one of the 7 million go back, we won't accept the settlement.
Okay, but I think that's people talking on behalf, in a way, of them. I mean, talking to Palestinian refugees, some of them know there's also a compromise. Some of them would like to return,
Fine.
some of them...
And I think Palestinians are perfectly reasonable. And I think a reasonable resolution of the conflict is possible. But when you start inflating the numbers, I don't know what you're trying to do. Do you want to resolve the conflict? Or do you want to create terror in the hearts of every Israeli? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish?
The way I view it is that they don't want to inflate the numbers, and the conflict has been on the two-state basis since Arafat accepted it in the late 70s.
No, I don't agree. The conflict has been on a two-state basis since 1947, when there was a partition resolution. Okay. And when Arafat in 1988 announced a Palestinian statehood, he referred back to the partition resolution. He says, I am making this claim on the basis of the unfinished business of 1947.
So let's say, it's been since 47 about the two-state solution, but an international law has repeatedly said that the two-state solution was the right settlement. But it hasn't happened. So I think the fact that it's not inflating the numbers, saying that there's like 7 million Palestinians, there are Palestinians, citizens of Israel.
I have no doubt about that.
And I think my problem is that I agree about being pragmatist, but when pragmatism doesn't work, what do you do? And in the solidarity movement that I'm not sure you call the solidarity movement a cult, but you referred to a cult, maybe talking about the BDS movement. I do think that the cult is not a little, it's actually getting bigger. Maybe it's not, and the BDS movement has actually, with its flaws maybe, succeeded in grasping people's attention and students.
Frank,
and it's
we have to free ourselves of illusions. When I don't know how old you are, but when I was a young man, I was a Maoist, And we always thought our movement is growing. 6,000, 8,000, we're growing, What you call growing, how many people are you really reaching? Are you reaching a mainstream public? I don't think so.
I mean, it takes time, but I think, for example, like this Israeli Apartheid week starting in a few weeks, end of February, and I'm not an organizer of this, but I know lots of people that organizes it, and this year it's like there's like 27 countries involved, loads of campuses that never touched it, and I think if the students start to get involved, sometimes the students can influence their parents, and then so I think it's a small process, but I think the BDS movement is helping actually making the movement a more global movement.
I said clearly, I think the solidarity movement has the right tactics. I support the BDS, but I said it will never reach a broad public until and unless they're explicit on their goal. And their goal has to include recognition of Israel, or it's a non-starter. It won't reach the public. Because the moment you go out there Israel will start to say, what about us? And they won't recognize our right. And in fact, that's correct. You can't answer the Israelis on that because they're making a statement that's factually correct. It's not an accident, an unwitting omission that BDS does not mention Israel. You know that and I know that. It's not like we forgot to mention it. They won't mention it because they know it will split the movement. Because there's a large segment of the movement, component of the movement, which wants to eliminate Israel.
But I think, again, talking in terms of eliminating Israel scares people because they don't understand what eliminating Israel means. It doesn't mean bombing. And the BDS movement is clear about like Israeli Jews living in the
Frank, there's a law. You say you want to enforce the law. BDS says we're rights-based. Okay? Is Israel part of the law or not? When the International Law Court of Justice made all of its findings in its advisory opinion, one of its findings was the June 67 border is Israel's legal border. That is Israel. That's the law. How can you claim that you want to enforce the law and omit that aspect of the law?
The two-state solution, we know that the facts on the ground, mainly because of Israel, like for example building in the E1 zone, are going to make the two-state solution pretty much impossible.
No, it's not true. I will talk about it at length tonight. I'm going to go through the maps.
Okay.
And then you'll judge for yourself.
It's so intertwined for me, like the two people are so intertwined that now the one state already exists and it's there.
No, Frank, if what you were saying were true, of course I'd have to agree with you. But I don't think it's accurate. And you'll just, I don't know if you're staying to hear me tonight.
I can't say.
Yeah, well, I'm
But
going to...
I've heard you.
I'm going to go...
In December.
Yeah, I'll go through the maps I have today. I'll show you the maps, exactly what it looks like.
Well, the two-state solution looks like.
No, what the issue with the settlements looks like.
Okay.
I go through the maps. And I brought them along this time, and they'll be on the screen, and you'll be able to judge for yourself. The problem is people are all over the place. When you say it's practically possible, then they say they're ideologically against it. And if you say it's ideologically, you will never be able to reach a public with it, then they say it's practically impossible. Because they don't want to recognize Israel. So it's like every kind of excuse and pretext. I don't see where that's going to go. You know, you talk about BDS, they make all these claims about their victories. All their claims about their victories. Well, you know what? You see these 10 fingers? These more than suffice to count all their victories. There are superfluous fingers here to count all their victories. It's a cult where the guru says we have all these victories and everyone nods their head and nobody sits down to do the arithmetic on their own. I see viola mentioned like 20 times a year. They keep repeating it as if it's a new victory. How many victories are there? Let's not get carried away. I hear them say BDS is the most successful tactic. Yes, it's had some victories, no question about it. But the way people promote it, as if it's proven itself and we're on the edge, on the verge of a victory of some sort, it's just sheer nonsense. It's sheer nonsense. It's a cult. And I personally, I'm tired of it. I went through my cult stage. I was a Maoist. And now when I look back, I'll tell you the truth. There were like two competing possibilities. You can be a Maoist, a Leninist, and all that sort of crap. And you could waste 20 years of your life. Or you could have worked with people like Ralph Nader, like my best friend, Alan Nairn. He was, if you know Alan Nairn, he worked under Nader. And he got a lot of bills passed through Congress. A lot of good stuff, It's nice we have seatbelts. That was Ralph Nader. Airbags. That was Ralph Nader. Thousands of little things that made life, save millions of lives. I'm not going to be in a cult again. I'm not going through that stage again with the gurus in Ramallah, giving out marching orders. And then if you disagree, they say 10,556,454 Palestinian civil society organizations have endorsed this. Who are these organizations? They're NGOs in Ramallah.
Isn't this so fucking funny?
One-person operations.
So
and they claim to represent what they call this thing, Palestinian civil society. If they really were Palestinian civil society, as they claim, then why can they never organize a demonstration of more than 500 people? If they really are, they represent Palestinian civil, I hear this all the time. Have you ever seen a statement by BDS that doesn't have the first subordinate clause? BDS, the largest civil society organized protest, endorsed by 26,555,000,000,000,000,000, organizations. They're just Ramallah, NGOs. Represent absolutely nothing.
Well, there's trade unions as well.
Oh, look, let's stop. If it were what you said, where are the demonstrations there?
You remember when he said, when Finkelstein was pointing out that there's language of elimination, right, in regards to Israel, and then this other guy, he was like, oh, it's because people don't know what we mean by elimination.
If there were really an active
BDS, I think, is turned to the international community, not to the
well, that to me is a problem. I'll tell you the truth. Because if you're an indigenous organization in Palestine, you should be organizing your people. And it's our job to organize from our side. I went through many solidarity movements. The Vietnamese never gave us marching orders. The Nicaraguans, the El Salvadorans, they didn't tell you what to do. They organized their people. And the solidarity movement abroad, we were supposed to make the judgment about how best to organize ourselves. And it's a very strange thing when the people there who claim to be the leaders of civil society, they can't organize a demonstration of 500 people among themselves, but they're telling everybody else abroad what to do. It's a weird inversion. When I was first involved in the Gaza Freedom March, I don't know if you were involved in it.
Yeah, I heard about it.
Okay, they said they were going to bring out 50,000 people in Gaza. 50,000 people. And you know how many they brought out? They brought out 300. It's a cult. You make up numbers, you fantasize, and all the followers are supposed to nod their head. Well, you know what? I'm 58 years old. I've been involved in this 30 years. I gave, and I'm going to say, for a Westerner, not for a Palestinian, I gave my life to the cause, and I'm not going to be anybody's fool. I'm not wasting time anymore. I'm tired of it. I really am. I've lost patience with it. I'm tired of gurus, and I'm tired of cults. Either we take advantage of the opportunity and try to reach people, or just forget it. It's a waste of time, And trying to play these silly little games of your 3 tiers, your 3-layer cake, and and I know exactly what we're talking about, because if we end the occupation and we bring back 6 million Palestinians and we have equal rights for Arabs and Jews, there's no Israel. That's what it's really about. And you think you're fooling anybody? You think you're so clever that people can't figure that out for themselves? No, they understand the arithmetic perfectly well. Are you going to reach a broad public which is going to hear the Israeli side, they want to destroy us? No, you're not. And frankly, you know what? You shouldn't. You shouldn't reach a broad public because you're dishonest. And I wouldn't trust those people if I had to live in the state. I wouldn't. It's dishonesty. And I don't want that kind of leadership. Then at least be honest what you want. We want to abolish Israel, and this is our strategy for doing it. Okay, be straightforward about it. But this kind of duplicity and disingenuousness. Oh, we're agnostic about Israel. No, you're not agnostic. You don't want it. Then just say it. But they know full well, if you say it, you don't have a prayer reaching a broad public. That's where the public is now. You're not going to reach them. And it's a waste of time. I can't deal with it anymore. I'm very tired of it. You have an opportunity now. That's what I'll talk about tonight. We have a chance to reach a broad public. People are sick and tired of Israel. They're weary of it. The Europeans, this has gone on too long. This has gone on longer than the 100 Years' War. This crazy Israel-Palestine conflict. It's like the War of the Roses, the 100 Years' War, and everything put together. They're tired of it. We have a chance to reach the public. And if we miss it now, it's criminal. It's criminal. I'm not going to participate in something that's going to squander a historic opportunity, maybe to end it. Hey, it can happen. I just came back from Northern Ireland. They found a settlement. And you talk to Protestants, you talk to Catholics, most people are willing to live with it. There are some people who find it unacceptable, but most people, it's okay. We can live with it. And I think you can find a settlement to Israel-Palestine, which virtually everybody, in particular the Palestinians, they can live with. Perfect? No. Ideal? No. We can live with? Yes. We can find that kind of settlement. It's possible. But the opportunity may just be squandered.
Yeah, everything that Norman Finkelstein just said there, right? That was literally like the idealized, this is where we need to be, formulation of liberal internationalism. Like whatever liberal internationalism says that it is, everything that it claims to be, like Norman Finkelstein just espoused it, but it happens to be the exact opposite, set of positions that Tony Blinken has taken, right? So what does that even mean when I think I've just found someone that's a better, example of liberal internationalism, abiding by norms, abiding by the international order, right? Focusing on cooperation. All those things that liberal interventionists, right, try to claim for themselves, right, as a kind of halo effect. They want that fucking halo. They don't want to be associated with this phrase, but then I guess you have to not do things that would associate you with that phrase. But Norman Finkelstein just described that perfectly. That's the crazy thing. When I imagine an ideal kind of, but realistic solution to Israel-Palestine, it looks, I guess, what liberal internationalism envisions. My doubts is whether these kinds of policies, get you there. Because think about it, we have a liberal internationalist in the form of Blinken, who says that, first of all, there is no red line that Israel could cross that would make him not give military aid. And then also that whatever that red line might be in some other world, it's at least not the one where Israel takes land illegally, right, against the international order, right, for no discernible security reason, no case that they could actually make. And is not, in any way distinguishable from any other kind of land grab in history, when you actually just analyze what's going on, what's been going on. It's just weird what kind of people and what kind of things and what sort of events are just in this kind of I guess post hoc way just associated with with concepts that like I don't know what this has to do with Tony Blinken on some level, right? I don't know how he could have, for example, made some of the statements that he made about Israel, right? Not having that red line, for example, and fall into this. It's just like how, right? That's just kind of self mythology at that point, isn't it? Like it's just. Right? I mean, like, what kind of fucking ideology, right? Has all of these like as examples plus the Iraq War, right? Because ultimately, like, whether or not like you want to blame it as like kind of like a neocon thing, I mean, the Iraq War was in the form of Tony Blinken, in the form of Joe Biden, to the extent that they are liberal interventionists. That was like their policies. Like what is the ideology here? Like, what does this even mean? Right? Throw the Iraq War into here. Okay, we have to function. That's part of the body count, as it were. Right? So throw the Iraq War. It's in this list. What is this list? Like, what is this about? What does this shit have to do with itself? Bosnia, Yugoslavia, Sierra Leone, Libya, Iraq War, maybe even Afghanistan. All liberal internationalism. But what the vision that Norman Finkelstein has just espoused, right? That's not right liberal internationalism, right? Blinken's position on that there is no red line. That's liberal internationalism. Tony Blinken, he's the liberal internationalist that would not use nuclear weapons. That's his red line.